There's an ancient Greek myth about an evil demigod named Procrustes. He was a blacksmith, and he owned a house beside a road. And inside that house, he had a bed made of iron. He would invite people to spend the night in it. If they were too long for the bed, he would chop off their legs so they'd fit. And if they were too short, he'd tie their arms and legs and stretch them out. Of course, once his guests were dead, he could make off with all their money. It's a fitting warning about a certain concept of equality. There are two ways of thinking about equality. On the one hand, the word can refer to the idea that we all have the same right to our own lives and that nobody's inherently superior to me or entitled to boss me around. But some people use it in a different way. They think people should be chopped down or stretched out and forced to be the same. The French writer Alexis de Tocqueville referred to this distinction when he said that there can be a legitimate passion for equality which arouses in all people a desire to be strong and respected and to elevate the little man to the rank of the great. But there can also be a debased taste for equality which leads the weak to want to drag the strong down to their level and which induces men to prefer equality in servitude to inequality in freedom. That distinction is vitally important to understanding the relationship between equality and freedom. Both things are important, and the American Declaration of Independence refers to both of them. It says, all men are created equal, and that we are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yet these principles seem to be in tension, because the more freedom people get, the more likely it is that they'll end up unequal. For centuries, people have struggled with the question of how to reconcile freedom and equality. Should government limit our freedom in order to ensure that people are more equal? This isn't a hard question to answer if we remember what Tocqueville called the noble sense of equality. When the Declaration of Independence uses the word equality, it means that nobody is inherently entitled to make decisions for anybody else. We're equal in the sense that each of us has the same right to our own lives. The men who wrote the Declaration were relying on the ideas of philosophers such as John Locke and Algernon Sidney, who argued that each of us owns our own lives and we don't belong to the government in the way that, for example, children belong to their parents. Kids lack the ability to make important decisions about the future, so they're not equal to adults in this sense, and that's why parents have an inherent right to control their children to at least some extent. Centuries ago, many people argued that grown adults are like children as far as the king is concerned. They said kings are like our parents, inherently wiser about our lives than we are. The Declaration says this is self-evidently false. Nobody has an inherent right to rule others. Or, as Algernon Sidney said, nobody is born wearing a saddle and nobody is born wearing spurs.
When we say all men are created equal, that's what we mean. We all have the right to make decisions about our own lives. And if somebody else wants to make decisions for us, they have to ask permission first. That means running for office and getting our votes.
What the Declaration was not saying is that we're all entitled to the same amount of wealth or the same degree of success or the same level of happiness in life. In fact, trying to make everybody equal in that sense would require violating our rights. It would mean taking what rightly belongs to you and giving it to me, or vice versa. And that would be unjust. The fact that someone else has more money than I do doesn't mean he's done something wrong that deserves punishment. In fact, there are lots of advantages to it. As the old saying has it, I never got a job from a poor person. Inequality in wealth is not necessarily unjust. In fact, it's usually not unjust at all. True, sometimes inequality can result from injustice. If someone steals my car, then I guess you could say we're unequal because he has a car and I don't. But the injustice comes from the stealing, not the inequality. And inequality usually doesn't result from any kind of injustice, just from the fact that everybody's different. We all have different talents and skills, and some people work harder or faster than others. That generates inequalities without any injustice. The philosopher Robert Nozick used a famous example. Imagine a society in which everybody has the same amount of money. And now suppose a famous basketball player is going to play in a game tonight, and lots of people want to see him play. If 2,000 people each buy a ticket, they all choose to give up some of their money to watch the game, the basketball player now has far more money than any of us. We're unequal. But nothing unjust has occurred. Nobody stole anything or hurt anybody to cause that inequality, so nothing is unjust about it. To put the point more broadly, the word unjust refers only to actions, not to states of affairs. The fact that people have different amounts of money isn't unjust, as long as nobody has committed some unjust act. If the government were to try to take all that money away from the basketball player, on the theory that he's become unequal to us, well, that really would be an unjust thing to do. That would mean taking away what he's earned fair and square. James Madison wrote in the Federalist Papers that economic inequality is caused by different and unequal faculties of acquiring property, but that protecting these different faculties is the first object of government. In other words, people are diverse. They have different skills and talents, and as a consequence, some people will get rich and some won't. Government's job is not to inflict new injustices by taking away people's earnings and giving them to other people. Instead, its job is to protect people's right to use their skills and talents. Not only is inequality not necessarily unjust, but people actually tend to become more unequal even while they're all getting richer. In other words, inequality increases as things get better. That might seem paradoxical, but here's how it works. Suppose I have $1 and you have $2. The difference between us is $1. That's how unequal we are. But now suppose someone comes along and doubles our wealth. Now I have $2 and you have $4. We are both twice as well off as we used to be. But also notice the inequality between us has also grown. Now instead of us being unequal by $1, we're unequal by 2. Now double our wealth again. I have $4 and you have $8. The inequality between us has increased yet again. You're now $4 richer than I am. Now, which should matter more? The fact that the inequality between us has increased? Or the fact that I now have 4 times the amount of money I used to have? If you really care about whether people are living better lives, then you should be more happy about the fact that I'm richer, not so worried about the fact that the inequality has grown.
In fact, the only way to eliminate all inequality would be to destroy all individuality and make everybody exactly the same. But that would make the world a horrible place to live. It's exactly because we're different that some people are good at making music, and some people are good at writing novels, and some people are good at designing houses, and some people are good at being lawyers, that the world is such an interesting and exciting place to live. And it's these differences that account for the differences in wealth and fame. If you cherish diversity, you cannot believe in ending all inequality.
Worse than that, to try to make everybody equal would actually be unfair. Every one of us has some special skill or gift that makes us different from others and therefore not equal to them. To force each of us to be equal would be an injustice. And if somebody is going to make us all equal, whether it be a king or a dictator or a legislature, then that means that person must not be equal to us. That person must stand above us in a place where he or she is allowed to decide which differences among us will be tolerated and which will not. It's strange that people who advocate the redistribution of wealth in order to eliminate inequality are fine with that kind of inequality. In fact, they say it's necessary to remedy the injustices of the natural world. This kind of thinking is called egalitarianism. One of the most famous advocates of egalitarianism was the philosopher John Rawls, who argued that we cannot deserve things we haven't earned, and of course we haven't earned our special endowments, intelligence or creativity, for example. Therefore, he said, we have no right to these things, and that means intelligent or creative or beautiful people have a moral obligation to give up their earnings to people who are less intelligent or creative or beautiful. In other words, we must atone for the sin of being smart or hardworking by devoting ourselves to improving the lives of those who are not.
Well, that's absurd for many reasons, but let's just consider one. It's just not true that I don't deserve things that I haven't earned. After all, I didn't earn my hands, I didn't earn my lungs or my liver or my kidneys, and neither did you. Does that mean that we don't have any right to these things? Am I morally obligated to give up my kidneys to the next person I meet who has kidney disease? Of course not.
The most recent version of this egalitarianism idea is known as privilege theory. Privilege theory says that the reason you have more and I have less is because society at large has somehow decided to give you more, and that this is unfair. But that's nonsense. Society didn't choose anything. If you earn more at your job than I do, it's because your employer decided to pay you more than my employer pays me. There's nothing unjust about that. It doesn't violate my rights at all. In fact, it would be wrong for me to resent it. That would be envy or jealousy, and it's a vice. Egalitarianism, whatever its form, actually proposes to make those who are more intelligent and capable subservient to those who are less intelligent and capable. The theory says that people who have done nothing to deserve the things that I own are entitled to those things for that very reason, and that I have a moral obligation to make everyone happy except myself. As the philosopher Ayn Rand observed, it is not equality before the law that the egalitarians seek, but inequality. The establishment of an inverted social pyramid with a new aristocracy on top, the aristocracy of non-value. Those who support egalitarianism or privilege theory often claim that their motivation is to help improve the situation of the poor. But as we've seen, anyone who actually cares about helping the poor should focus not on equality, but on making people richer, even though this will typically result in more inequality, because that's what actually improves lives. People in poverty need to be made wealthier, not more equal. More often, what really motivates these theories is, as I said earlier, envy, resentment against those who have been more successful. This resentment then leads some people to want to tear down success and greatness and beauty, often by treating boring or ugly or nonsensical things as if they were beautiful and smart. Beauty and greatness, after all, are inherently unequal ideas. It seems strange that some people would prefer to have everybody worse off as long as that would make them more equal. It's a deeply inhumane idea, but it is indeed how some people think. It's the debased idea of equality that Tocqueville talked about. There's another misconception that leads people to think that inequality is a kind of injustice. It's the idea that the world is a so-called zero-sum game, meaning a situation in which the only way you can win is if I lose. Zero-sum thinking assumes that there's a finite amount of stuff in the world, so if one person has more money, another person must have less. But a free society is not a zero-sum world. On the contrary, when people create new things, when someone invents the airplane or builds a new house or even just cooks a meal, they're making things that didn't exist before, and that means there is not a fixed amount of wealth in the world. The fact that one person is richer does not cause another person to be poorer. On the contrary, when the government tries to make people equal, it actually does make the world into a zero-sum situation. That's because to make people equal would require constantly monitoring everything they do to ensure they didn't create inequality. That would mean eliminating all privacy and all individuality. And it would mean that anytime someone became unequal by building something new or using their talents in a special way, that inequality would have to be rectified by the big brother state. Not only would that require totalitarianism, it would also create a disincentive that makes everybody worse off. After all, if hardworking people are just going to have their earnings taken away to give to others, why would anybody work hard?
If you're punished for success and rewarded for failure, you'd be foolish to try your best. And that's why countries that engage in egalitarianism tend to find the most accomplished and talented people leaving, moving to places that practice less egalitarianism.
Equality, properly understood, is not the enemy of freedom. In some ways, freedom makes us more equal, because in a free society, people must treat each other with respect and trade their labor and skills voluntarily. In other ways, freedom does make us more unequal, precisely because it expands our opportunities to do all sorts of different things. Some people will become architects and pilots and doctors and novelists, and every free choice they make will increase our inequalities in some way or another. To eliminate that inequality would mean destroying the diversity and the freedom that makes us all human.